The dust rose in angry clouds behind her boots as Sarah ran, her lungs burning with each desperate breath she pulled from the scorching Arizona air. The sun hung merciless and white in the afternoon sky, turning the desert into a shimmering maze of heat and shadow. Behind her, she could hear them 3 riders, maybe 4, their horses' hooves pounding the hard, packed earth like drums of doom. She didn't dare look back. Looking back would cost her precious seconds, and seconds were all that stood between her and whatever fate those men had planned. Her carpetbag had fallen somewhere back near the rocks where she'd first spotted them. In it were all her worldly possessions, her mother's silver locket, the deed to a patch of land she'd never seen, 3 dresses, and $47 that represented every cent she'd saved. Working at the boarding house in Tucson, none of it mattered now. All that mattered was the line of cottonwoods she could see in the distance, marking where Willow Creek cut through the desert. If she could reach the trees, she might find cover, might find help, might find some miracle that would save her from the men who'd been following her wagon since she'd left town that morning. The old prospector who'd agreed to drive her to redemption had noticed them first. Zeke was his name, a grizzled man with kind eyes and hands gnarled by years of digging in unforgiving earth. "We got company," he'd said quietly, his weathered face creasing with concern as he glanced over his shoulder at the riders maintaining a steady distance behind them. "Don't like the look of 'em." Sarah had felt her stomach clench. She was alone out here, miles from anywhere, with only an old man and a wagon pulled by 2 tired mules for protection. When the riders had finally closed the distance and called for them to stop, Zeke had looked at her with eyes full of apology and fear. "Run, girl," he'd whispered. "Run and don't stop. I'll try to buy you time." So she'd jumped from the wagon and run, her Sunday dress catching at her legs, her bonnet flying off within the first 50 yards. Behind her, she'd heard Zeke's voice raised in protest, then the harsh laughter of the men, and finally a single gunshot that made her stumble and nearly fall. She didn't stop, couldn't stop. Zeke had bought her time with his life, and she wouldn't waste it. The cottonwoods seemed to grow no closer despite her desperate flight. Her side ached with a stitch that felt like a knife between her ribs, and her throat was dust, dry. The men behind her were calling out now, their words carried on the hot wind crude suggestions of what they'd do when they caught her, promises that made her stomach turn and her legs pump harder, despite their trembling weakness. Another gunshot cracked through the air, and she felt a spray of dirt kick up 2 feet to her left. They were shooting at her now, perhaps tired of the chase, perhaps just cruel enough to enjoy the sport of it. Sarah veered right, then left, trying to make herself a harder target, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The heat was overwhelming, pressing down on her like a physical weight. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She heard the thunder of hooves growing closer, and risked a glance over her shoulder. 3 of them, close enough now that she could see their faces, hard men with harder eyes, the kind who'd learned long ago that the world was cruel and decided to be crueler. The one in front, a big man with a black beard, was grinning. He raised his rifle almost casually, sighting down the barrel at her fleeing form. Sarah turned back to face forward, pouring every last ounce of strength into her burning legs. The cottonwoods were closer now. Maybe a quarter mile. It might as well have been 100. The rifle cracked again, and this time there was no spray of dirt, no near miss. This time there was a punch between her shoulder blades, a burning sensation that spread through her chest like fire. Her legs, which had been carrying her forward with desperate momentum, suddenly forgot how to work. She felt herself falling, the ground rushing up to meet her, and she had time to think with strange clarity that this was how it ended, dying in the dust under a pitiless sun, killed by men she didn't know for reasons she couldn't fathom. But she didn't hit the ground. Instead, she found herself caught in arms that were strong and sure, lowered with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the violence of the moment. Through the haze of shock and pain, she looked up into a face she'd never seen before, lean and bronzed, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a jaw set with grim determination. He wore a dusty black hat and a weather-beaten duster that had seen better days, and when he met her eyes, something passed between them, some wordless understanding that he'd been in the right place at the right moment and wouldn't let her fall. "I got you," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried the accent of Texas or maybe Oklahoma. "You're gonna be all right." Behind them, the riders were shouting, their celebration at hitting their target turning to confusion and then to anger. Through her fading consciousness, Sarah heard the cowboy call out, his voice carrying across the desert with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "That's far enough, boys. This ends here." "The hell it does," the bearded man shouted back. "That's our business you're holding, stranger. Best you put her down and ride on if you know what's good for you." The cowboy had laid Sarah down gently behind a large boulder, his hands quick and efficient as he wadded up his bandana and pressed it to the wound in her back. The pain of it made her gasp, but his eyes found hers, steady and reassuring. "I know it hurts, ma'am, but I need to slow the bleeding. You hold on now, you hear me, don't you dare quit." Then he was standing, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip with a practiced ease that spoke of long familiarity. Sarah, fighting to stay conscious, watched as he stepped out from behind the boulder to face the three riders who'd pulled their horses to a halt about 30 yards away. "The lady's not your business anymore," the cowboy said, his voice calm but carrying a cold edge like winter steel. "She's under my protection now. You boys made a mistake following her. You made a bigger one shooting her. You make one more by not riding away right now, and it'll be your last." The bearded man laughed, but it was a nervous sound. Something about the cowboy's stance, the way he stood with his weight balanced and his hand near his gun, made even these hard men hesitate. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you," the bearded man said, but his bravado was cracking. "Odds ain't in your favor, friend." "They never are," the cowboy replied. "But I'm still here, and better men than you are feeding worms. So you have a choice to make, and you best make it quick because my patience is wearing thin, and that lady behind me is bleeding. You can ride away and live to be terrible people another day, or you can reach for those guns and see how fast you really are. I'll even give you fair warning. I'm faster." The 3 men exchanged glances. The bearded one's hand twitched toward his pistol, and time seemed to stretch and slow. Sarah, lying in the dust with pain radiating through her chest, watched as the cowboy's hand moved, not in a frantic grab, but in a smooth, almost lazy draw that ended with his pistol clearing leather and speaking thunder before any of the riders could complete their own draw. The bearded man jerked backward in his saddle, his pistol falling from nerveless fingers as a red stain bloomed on his shoulder. His horse danced sideways, spooked by the gunfire. The other 2 riders froze, their own guns half-drawn, staring at the cowboy who'd already re-aimed at the man on the left. "Next one goes through something vital," the cowboy said conversationally. "Your friend there will live if he gets that shoulder tended to. You 2 won't be so lucky if you finish that draw. So what's it going to be?" The rider on the right, a thin man with a scar across his cheek, slowly raised his hands. After a moment's hesitation, the 3rd man did the same. The bearded man was hunched over his horse's neck, cursing and clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Smart choice," the cowboy said. Now you're going to turn those horses around and ride back the way you came. You're going to tell anyone who asks that this stretch of desert is closed for business, and you're going to hope to whatever God you pray to that I never see your faces again, because if I do, I won't be in such a charitable mood. We clear?" They were clear. Within moments, the three riders were disappearing back across the desert, the bearded man's curses fading into the distance. The cowboy watched them go, his pistol still in hand, until they were nothing but wavering specks in the heat shimmer. Only then did he holster his weapon and turn back to Sarah. He knelt beside her, his gray eyes filled with concern as he examined the makeshift bandage he'd placed over her wound. "Bull, it went clean through," he said, and she heard relief in his voice. "Missed the lung by the grace of God. You're going to hurt like the devil for a while, but I think you'll pull through if we can get you proper doctoring." "Who are you?" Sarah managed to whisper, her voice thin and thready. "Name's Cole Brennan." He replied, already working to bind her wound more securely with strips torn from his shirt. "And you can thank my horse for this. Dusty there's got a nose for trouble, bolted on me about a mile back. I was chasing him down when I heard the shooting. Figured anyone firing that many rounds was either having the worst hunting luck in history or was up to no good." Sarah tried to laugh, but it came out as more of a whimper. Cole's hands paused in their work, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected gentleness. "Easy now," he said softly. "Save your strength. There's a town called Redemption about 5 miles west of here. My horse Dusty's over by those rocks, and I've got a bedroll we can use to make a travois. It won't be comfortable, but it'll get you to the doctor." The old man, Sarah whispered, "Zeke, they shot him, I heard." Cole's jaw tightened. "I saw the wagon back a ways. I'm sorry, ma'am, he's gone. But he gave you a chance, and we're going to make sure it counts for something." True to his word, Cole fashioned a travois from his bedroll and some branches from the cottonwoods. His horse, a rangy dun gelding with intelligent eyes, stood patient as Cole rigged up the makeshift stretcher and carefully lifted Sarah onto it. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her body, but she bit her lip and bore it. She'd come too far to quit now. The journey to redemption was a blur of pain and sun, and the steady rhythm of Dusty's hooves. Cole walked beside the horse, one hand on the lead rope, the other periodically checking to make sure Sarah was still conscious. When the pain got too bad, when she felt herself starting to slip away into darkness, his voice would call her back. Steady, calm, telling her stories about nothing and everything. About growing up in Texas, about a sister who could outride any man in 3 counties, about a river that ran cold and clear through land that had once been his family's until the bank took it after. "The war, why?" Sarah asked at one point, when the pain had receded to a dull roar and her mind had cleared enough for questions. "Why did you help me? You could have been killed." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the buildings of redemption were just beginning to take shape. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My sister Ellen, she was about your age when the ranch failed. Decided she'd head to California, make a fresh start. I told her to wait, that I'd go with her once I'd settled some business. But she was stubborn, said she could take care of herself." He paused, and Sarah saw his jaw work. "She made it about 50 miles before someone decided a woman traveling alone was easy pickings. They found her 2 weeks later." "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "So am I," Cole said. "Been sorry every day since. Can't help her now, but I figured maybe I could help someone else's sister, someone else's daughter." He glanced down at her, and she saw something ancient and sad in his eyes. "We all got ghosts we carry, ma'am. Mine just happened to walk next to me most days." They reached redemption as the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, that seemed too beautiful for a day that had held so much violence. The town was small but bustling, a way station for miners and cattlemen and travelers heading west toward California. Cole carried Sarah into the doctor's office himself, calling for help with an urgency that brought the physician running. Dr. Samuel Harris was a compact man with silver hair and hands that moved with the confidence of long practice. He took one look at Sarah's wound and started barking orders to his wife, who appeared from a back room with arms full of clean linens. Within moments, Sarah found herself on an examining table, Cole relegated to the waiting room despite his clear reluctance to leave. The next hours passed in a haze of laudanum and pain as Dr. Harris cleaned and stitched the wound. The bullet had indeed passed clean through, missing her lung but cracking a rib on its way out. "You're lucky," the doctor told her more than once. "Few inches higher and to the right, you wouldn't have made it out of the desert." "It wasn't luck," Sarah murmured, thinking of Cole's face as he'd caught her, of his steady hands and calmer voice. "It was a cowboy with good timing." Dr. Harris smiled. "Cole Brennan, yeah, he's got a reputation for that. Showed up in these parts about 2 years ago, keeps to himself mostly, but he's helped more than a few folks in bad situations. Some say he's looking for redemption, running from something back in Texas. Others say he's just a decent man in a world that don't have enough of them." Sarah spent 3 weeks recuperating in a room above the general store, paid for by Cole, before she'd even been conscious enough to protest. Mrs. Harris came by twice daily to change her dressings and make sure she was eating. The town marshal, a gruff man named Duggan, took her statement about the attack and sent word to the next town over to watch for the 3 riders. Probably long gone by now, he told her. Men like that scatter like cockroaches when the light hits them, but we'll keep an eye out. Cole came by every evening just as the sun was setting. At first he'd stay only a few minutes, asking after her health with his hat in his hands like a schoolboy calling on his first sweetheart. But as the days passed and Sarah's strength returned, he stayed longer. They'd sit by the window, watching the town settle in for the night, and talk about everything and nothing. She learned that he was 30, too, that he'd fought in the war on the Union side despite being from Texas, that his family had disowned him for it, that he'd drifted after his sister's death, working as a ranch hand, a freight guard, sometimes as a lawman in towns that needed someone who could handle a gun, that he was tired of drifting, ready to find a place to put down roots, but hadn't found the right place yet. She told him about her own story, growing up in St. Louis, losing her parents to cholera, working in the boarding house to save money for a fresh start, about the letter that had come from a lawyer in San Francisco, informing her that a distant uncle she'd never met had left her a small parcel of land near Redemption, about her decision to head west to build something of her own. Funny thing about that, Cole said on the evening of her 3rd week, as they watched the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky, "I've been looking at land around here myself. There's a valley about 10 miles north, got good water and grass, big enough for a decent herd if a man was willing to work for it." "So why haven't you bought it?" Sarah asked. Cole was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Guess I was waiting for a reason to stay in one place, for something that felt like it mattered more than just getting by." Sarah felt her heart beat faster. She'd been trying not to think about what would happen when she was well enough to leave, trying not to acknowledge the way she looked forward to Cole's evening visits, the way his presence made her feel safe in a way she'd never felt before. "Cole," she said softly, and he looked up, meeting her eyes. "That land your uncle left you, you have any plans for it?" "I was thinking maybe a small ranch," she said. "Nothing fancy, but enough to make a living. Maybe some horses. I always liked horses. Our ranch needs a lot of work. Cole said carefully. Be easier with two people. I imagine it would be. Sarah agreed, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Cole stood, crossing to the window to stand beside her chair. He looked out at the darkening land, at the vast expanse of sky and desert and possibility. When he spoke, his voice was low and sincere. Miss Sarah, I'm not a man who's good with fancy words. I've got a past that's checkered at best, and I can't promise you an easy life. But I can promise you that I'd work hard, treat you right, and make sure no one ever hurts you again. If you'd be willing to take a chance on a broken-down cowboy with more ghosts than good sense, I'd be honored to help you build that ranch. As a partner, or something more, if you'd have me. Sarah reached up and took his hand, feeling the calluses earned by years of hard work, the strength tempered with gentleness. You caught me when I was falling, she said. Seems only right you'd be there for the rest of it. Cole's smile, when it came, transformed his face, chasing away the shadows and sadness that usually lingered in his eyes. He knelt beside her chair, still holding her hand, and for a moment they just looked at each other, two wounded souls who'd found each other in the vastness of the desert. I can't promise it'll be easy, he said again. I don't want easy, Sarah replied. I want real. I want someone who shows up when it matters. Then that's what you'll have, Cole said, for as long as you want it. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of the ranch house Cole had built with his own hands, watching the sun set over land that was now theirs. Legally bound together in both marriage and partnership, the house wasn't much yet. Just 4 rooms and a roof that only leaked when it rained hard, but it was theirs. In the corral, 3 horses grazed peacefully. In the barn, they had 2 milk cows and a growing collection of chickens. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Cole rode up from the south pasture as the last light was fading, his hat pushed back and his face dusty from a day of mending fences. When he saw her on the porch, his face lit up with that smile that still made her heart skip, and he nudged Dusty into a trot. "Evening, Mrs. Brennan," he said as he swung down from the saddle, and she still got a thrill from hearing that name, from being part of something bigger than herself. "Evening, Mr. Brennan," she replied, moving carefully down the steps. The wound had healed well, though Dr. Harris said she'd always carry the scar. She thought of it not as a mark of violence, but as a reminder of the moment her life had changed, of the cowboy who'd caught her when she was falling and never let her fall again. Cole wrapped his arms around her, careful of her back, even though she'd told him 100 times she was healed. Some habits, she supposed, were hard to break. She leaned into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and leather and hard work, feeling utterly safe in a way she'd never imagined possible during those terrifying moments in the desert. "Good day," she asked. "Better now," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "How about you? That mare still giving you trouble?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Sarah said. "I think she's starting to trust me. Give her another week, and she'll be gentle as a lamb." Cole laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "That's my girl. Takes something wild and turns it into something better." They stood there on the porch as night fell completely, wrapped in each other's arms, while around them the desert came alive with the sounds of evening coyotes calling in the distance, the rustle of wind through the sage, the peaceful sounds of horses settling in the barn. This was their life now, built from dust and determination, and a moment of violence that had somehow led to grace. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sarah asked quietly. "Wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been chasing Dusty?" Cole was silent for a long moment, his arms tightening around her. "Every day," he admitted. And every day I thank God for a stubborn horse and bad timing that turned out to be the best timing of my life. You gave me something to fight for, Sarah, something worth staying for. You gave me my life, Sarah replied. Everything else is just details. No, Cole said softly. I just caught you when you were falling. You gave yourself your life by being brave enough to run, strong enough to survive, and crazy enough to take a chance on a drifter with a guilty conscience. Sarah turned in his arms, looking up into those storm, gray eyes that had been the first thing she'd seen when death came calling. We saved each other, she said firmly, and we're going to keep saving each other every day for as long as we have. That's a promise I can keep, Cole said, and kissed her as the stars came out one by one above their little ranch, their little piece of redemption carved out of the unforgiving desert. They'd both been running, him from his past, her toward her future, and they'd found each other in that moment when everything could have ended. Instead, it had just been the beginning. Years later, when their children asked how their parents had met, Sarah and Cole would exchange a look full of shared memory and hard-won happiness. They'd tell the story together, trading off details, the heat of that terrible day, the sound of gunfire, the moment of falling and being caught. They'd talk about second chances and the way fate sometimes works in mysterious ways. How the worst day of your life can lead to the best days if you're brave enough to see it through. And when the children were old enough to understand, Sarah would take them out to the boulder where Cole had first laid her down, where he'd stood against 3 men to protect a stranger. It still stood there, a silent witness to violence and courage, and Sarah had carved their initials into it, not as a monument to what had almost been lost, but as a reminder of what had been found. Remember, she'd tell them, placing her hand on the sun-warmed stone, that sometimes the worst moments bring the best people into our lives. Your father caught me when I was falling, and I've been falling for him ever since. And Cole, standing behind her with his hand on her shoulder, would smile that rare, genuine smile and add, and your mother taught me that a man's past doesn't have to define his future. That redemption is real if you're willing to work for it. That love is worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth building a life around. The ranch prospered over the years. More horses, more cattle, more land as they saved and bought parcels from neighbors moving on or giving up. They became pillars of the community. Cole, known for his fairness and quiet strength, Sarah for her kindness and determination. They raised 4 children who grew up strong and confident, taught by example that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And every year, on the anniversary of that terrible, wonderful day, Cole and Sarah would ride out to the desert together, just the 2 of them, and stand under the vast Arizona sky. They'd remember old Zeke, who'd given his life to buy a young woman time to run. They'd remember the moment of falling and catching, of choosing to help when it would have been easier to ride away. They'd remember that love sometimes comes in unexpected forms, at unexpected times, when you least expect to find it. Would you do it again? Sarah asked one year, when they were both gray and weathered, and their children were grown with children of their own. Knowing all the hard times, all the struggles, would you still catch a falling stranger? Cole looked at her with eyes that were still storm-gray, still capable of seeing straight through to her soul. He smiled, took her hand and said what he'd always said, what he'd always mean, every single time. For you, Sarah Brennan, I'd catch you every single time. And standing there in the desert where it had all begun, where she'd been shot and caught and saved and found, Sarah leaned into the man who'd given her a second chance at life and whispered, "Then it's a good thing I'm still falling." They rode home together as the sun set, 2 souls who'd found each other in violence and built a life in peace, proof that even in the harshest landscape with the longest odds, love could not just survive but flourish. All it took was a cowboy willing to catch a falling woman, and a woman brave enough to trust him not to let her hit the ground